Hello guys, we are back today with something a little bit different. So I wanted to do a little demo on the Inktense pencils. I don't know if you guys have used these at all, but I think they're super fun, and if you're into, super vibrant drawings and outcomes, it's definitely something you want to try out. It's basically what it is, Inktense. It's very intense ink-like pencils. So this is the full set of 72. Let's see here. Put that down. And what I did basically was I made swatches on the Fabriano Artistico 140-pound hot press. So I made little swatches because I think this part's important, because this is one of those pencils that I find that the colors on the end of the pencil are actually much further off than they typically are. For example, let's see, 1520 is this one here. So see how the pencil looks a little bit darker? Because it is something that you basically spread around with water, there is going to be a little bit loss of consistency as far as, coverage. So this is like a tint of the pencil. But, obviously if you kept layering this pencil to the over and over and got it super dark, it would probably be closer to that. But having this kind of gives you a better idea of the tone that you're going to get, or the shade. This is maybe a couple layers, 2 layers on each one at most, but the water will definitely thin everything out a little. So like 1400, I think this one's 14, yep. So you'll see there, 1400, see how it looks a little more yellowy and olive on the pencil? So this is just a watered down shade of that. So that will help you determine which colors you want to pick. So what I think I want to do, I basically took a bunch of different kinds of paper, and we're going to try the Inktense on each one to see how they work on each type of paper. And then what I thought I might do is watercolor as well on the other side, so we can see how watercolor works on this paper too. Because these are a lot of different papers, some we've used, some we haven't. So it'll be interesting to kind of see the difference in just so it'll help compare the vibrancy of the Inktense versus the watercolor pencils. Now, as far as I know, the Inktense is not light fast, so that's something to consider if you're working on something that you're going to sell. It might not be the best option, but I love to use it for underpainting a lot of the times, to get that nice deep set in underpainting, and then use the other pencils on top. So the papers we're going to try out today, let me move this out of the way. We're going to do the Lux Archival, which I just got and I love. The Uart 800 black paper. Suede Matboard. Canson Bristol. Our light gray Pastel Mat. So let me start moving these up a little so you can see them all. Arches watercolor, 140-pound hot press. We use the Fabriano all the time. This is basically the same consistency, just different brand. Some people prefer one over the other. I find them both super similar. This one, I had some extra sheets, so I cut off a piece of this instead, so just so you could see how it works. The Metans Touch paper, Fisher 400, and Stonehange, which I dislike with regular pencils, but I may like it with this because it's very spongy, and I find that it doesn't allow the buildup of layers how I work and how I like. So that's one of those weird personal things that I just don't really like that paper, but I wanted you to see. All right, so I'm going to start with the Stonehange. And let me zoom in a little bit here. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start with, I want to show you also how they blend. So this is blended with water. We're going to take 2 colors that will blend well together. So we're going to do, let's see, let's take a blue, and if I can get this out. Actually, let me go to my swatches, see which ones. So I want number 400, that reddish tone, I think. Oh no, 410. I'm going to use 410, which is a red, and 1210, which is the blue. here's my 1210. Here's my 410. This is just for sake of, just so you can see how it mixes together as well. So on the left, we're going to be doing the, oh, hold on, my camera's not focusing. There we go. All right, so on the left, we're going to do the Inktense pencils, and then we'll do some watercolor on the right. So there's a few ways you can use this pencil. You can either draw it right on the page, or you can take a brush with water and kind of just glide it along the side of the brush to get the pigment on the brush. But if you were going to do that a lot, just get the blocks, because the Inktense blocks is basically how you'd use that. That would waste a lot of the pencil, but sometimes with the sanded paper I like to do that because it's just a little bit smoother of a transition. Okay, I'm going to take the water. You don't want too much water at first. Each paper is going to be different with the amount of water that you're using as well. So start with just a little bit. So it works pretty good on this paper. There's your purple and your red. And when you're mixing it, you can push the pigment around quite a bit. So you want to pay attention to the areas that you're coloring and whether it's supposed to be a certain color or not. Make sure, see, because if I start down here blending, you're going to see that color, you know, stick on the brush, much more so than watercolor pencil does. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I mean, you can always go over it, but that's just one of those little things. All right, so not too bad. And then let's try the watercolor pencil on the Stonehange. So I'm going to use a blue and a red. If I have a red. I personally don't like the consistency of the Stonehange paper, but you may like it a lot more. But see how I'm going back and forth, and it doesn't make a huge difference as far as going back and forth from color to color, where this one you do have to be a little more aware of switching from a blue directly going into red with the same water that you're blending with. So here it's kind of more seamless, where this you just have to be a little bit more precise as far as blending versus doing something like that. So not bad. Again, I still don't like the consistency of this paper. It's, I don't know, it's spongy to me, so it feels a bit odd, but definitely give it a shot if you can get a sample piece or have some. You can try it out. Even then, leave some space if you want to. These are all 4x6 pieces, so if you want to try other pencils to test out on the papers, then keep these and you can test out little areas. So we'll move that one aside. It's the Fisher 400, a great sanded paper. And keep in mind with sanded papers, you don't need to press down hard at all, because the pencil literally just almost grabs it from the paper. You don't need as much either, because it doesn't bleed into the paper or absorb into the paper like cotton papers do. This is the Inktense. Oh, it's very, very bright. Very, very bright. See, that is a great example of how vibrant you can get this. So now I'm going to rinse off my brush because I want to go back to the blue. You can also thin it out You can keep adding water while it's wet, but you have to be kind of quick about it too. So just play around with it a lot. If you want to spread the blend, go back and forth. Because the ink does stay on the brush. Like, once I rinse it, see, it stays on there pretty good. So that looks awesome. That's a very, very vibrant outcome on the Fisher 400. I love the sanded papers with wet media. It always comes out really bold. Like, you'll see, I mean, look at the difference. This is on white paper, this is on like a yellow sanded paper, but you see the difference in vibrancy. One of my biggest pet peeves, I think, in drawing is having anything look dull. I don't want it to look dull. I always shoot for having something look really vibrant and, you know, popping off the page versus something muted. That's why watercolor pencils I never liked so much, because I felt like watercolor was always so muted, which is great in some cases, but for my style, I really like to have a boldness. So that's why using them for an underpainting is like a perfect solution for me. So see how even this comes out a lot bolder? I'm running out of water fast, so you do need a little bit more water on the sanded paper. It's not as seamless as that, or as smooth, I should say, but still really cool. So, it's a little comparison. See how muted versus the boldness of these. That's awesome. I mean, that's super, super bold. So watercolor pencil, Inktense. The Inktense is really fun too. It's just something so different to make a lot pop. All right, so here's the Metans Touch. Actually, do it this way. All right, I get my red. So this one kind of draws on it differently. It's a thicker, not thicker, I guess more coarse of a sanded surface. So the texture is a bit more separated, I guess I would say, than other sanded papers, which, you know, the sanded granules are way tighter. This is a bit more of a rough, I'd say coarse surface. So we'll see how this one goes. And basically, this is going to determine the next paper choice for the next drawing, which is going to be a lotus. Actually, let me just put the watercolor pencil down anyhow. See how the watercolor pencil, it flakes out? I'm barely touching it, but it's flaking off quite a bit on this paper too, where the Inktense didn't really. It's a thicker lead, the Inktense, than a watercolor pencil would be. Oh, that looks really nice on there though. Alright, so a little bit harder of a transition because it's on super bright white, but that looks really cool. But one thing about this paper is sometimes you can see the texture too much, and this does help with that issue. Because when we did the turtle eye, we did tons and tons of layers. But you really don't have to. That's just one of those weird pet peeve things I have with seeing textures that I don't want to see. But you can still see kind of the granules there, so you'd want to add a lot more layers. If you looked close on this paper, let me see if I can zoom in so you can see what I mean. See if it'll focus. So see those little dots? That's the texture of the paper, and that's what I mean by not liking how it's sitting. So you'd have to add a lot more layers to make that go away. But that's just my weird little thing. You might be fine with that. It's how the paper is, so. And we've used watercolor pencil on this paper before, so we know it already works well. So it's a nice muted undertone. And obviously, like, this is just literally one layer of each, so you would have to add more layers naturally, but just for the sake of showing you comparing them to each other. So even there, very bold, muted. But watercolor pencil is meant to be that way. Even though this blends like a watercolor pencil, I just want you to see the difference in the ink, because it is ink, and versus just a basic watercolor pencil. But it's very cool, either one. But I just love the boldness of the Inktense. So there's the previous one, from Fisher 400 to the Metans Touch. So far, the Fisher 400 blend is my favorite. But let's go to the next one. So this is our cotton paper that we use all the time, either Arches 140 pound or the Fabriano Artistico 140 pound. Either or, you can pick. I just had this loose, so I grabbed it. But it's going to come out pretty much the same. I mean, this is the Fabriano, so you can see how it comes out on this. So the cotton paper, you would probably not need as much water, obviously, because of the, it will absorb very quickly into the cotton, versus the other paper, you need a little bit more water because of the texture of the paper. But I will show you. It's so hard to see, what something would look like without blending it, especially pencils like these. Right. So I didn't even put the water on the brush. This is from last time, so that's how little water I need. So far this pencil works fantastic on every paper. And obviously it's going to look a little more watered down because of the absorption of the cotton paper. So keep that in mind, versus a sanded paper where it's going to sit on top. It's not going to be absorbed. So even though it's the same pencil, you see how solid that is? There are no breaks in there. There's nothing that's, muted about it at all. And that's a yellowy paper. This is white, and you can see how you can already see the patches of the cotton coming through because it's being absorbed already. So that's just one little tidbit to keep in mind. Obviously, you'll go over these with more layers and see the differences, which we can try too. And this is your regular watercolor. So much more muted. So that's on the cotton. So you can see the texture in the first layers as well, just like on the Metans Touch. You can see the texture on the paper. That's why I love the Fisher 400, because you don't see anything. This is pretty much the same as the Uart 400. It's not the same brand, not the same. Both are super similar, same manila color, but either or is going to be a great option for either or. So that's the Arches. Now we'll go to my favorite, Pastel Mat. My favorite so far. I think the Lux Archival might be my new favorite. I tried it with a few different pencils and fell in love with it. All right, Pastel Mat. I don't think I've tried. Oh no, I did. I did one drawing for Color Pencil magazine. It was the Christmas challenge entry of my Christmas lights, and I did it all on this paper with an underpainting of the Inktense, and that's when I fell in love with the Inktense pencils. That was like the turning point of like, yep, that's definitely what I'm going to use on certain papers for certain types of drawings, because it just came out really, really bold, and it really helped to push along the process of getting to the more detailed areas quicker. Sorry, the paper keeps moving. So this is the difference between, this is why I love Pastel Mat. When you first add a layer down, you can see the texture clear as day. But for some reason, after you blend, it really does almost instantly matte, where you don't see the texture anymore. Whereas the Metans Touch paper, you still see the texture quite a bit. But this, it almost covers it just much more smoothly, I think. I'm not sure why, but I love it. So let me try and blend this way a little bit so you can see the purples. See, that's like, let me compare that. So see the Metans Touch compared to the Pastel Mat? I mean, technically Pastel Mat is a sanded paper, but I don't know. I don't think it is. It's more like a textured mix between sanded paper and cotton paper. I can't explain it. But this one almost feels very similar, a little rougher, but yet you can still see these dots of the harder texture on this one, where this ended up being a lot more bold. So until you start doing things next to each other, you really see the differences and how pencils will work with each type of paper. And we already know watercolor pencil works good on this paper. It's one of my favorite underpainting options. And even the watercolor pencil seems to blend and cover all of the texture and really fill it in, even though it's not being absorbed. So I love Pastel Mat, still love it. So Fisher 400 Pastel Mat. The cotton papers I obviously really love because of the amount of layers you can add, and just the versatility of it. But the Pastel Mat's just, you can't go wrong with it. You have to get used to it. I understand that, but you can't go wrong with it. So this is Canson Bristol paper. We used this paper in the beginning when we did a lot of the pre-steps for like learning how to shade and layer and stuff like that. I used the Bristol for a lot of those tutorials. It's a basic, very smooth, flat, I think it's a cotton paper, should be a cotton paper, but doesn't have a texture. It's just almost like a thicker cardstock sort of feel to it. In this paper you can't add as many layers because there is no texture. So it doesn't have it's not as heavy as the other papers. So to build up, it's a lot quicker to build up and be done with layers because you won't be able to add any more. But that's where this would come in good to get underpainting done with something like this. And it would be actually really good for the ink because the Bristol is really good for illustration and markers and things like that. So that blended pretty good. I don't think I would use this paper for watercolor, only because I think it's almost too smooth, and watercolor needs a little bit more of a texture to kind of work the way you want. So I actually don't even like how this came out on here. But Bristol is one of those papers that it's good for your practice stuff. It's good for testing out pencils or things like that, or learning how to blend and whatnot. So that's the Bristol. It's probably my least favorite. Now the Suede Matboard, which I haven't done yet on our course because I'm trying to figure out, I'm still working with this paper myself, and it's a new paper to me too, because it's almost like velvety. It's like a mix between, I'd say, Pastel Mat, added with like an added layer of like this velvet coat on it. It's very strange, but it's a very cool paper too, because it's a board. It's very thick. But I'm still trying to figure out the right kind of drawing to do on it. I'm sure we could do anything, but I figured we could use it later on because it is a little bit more complex of a paper to figure out than some of the other ones. Oh wow, that blends really nice. I've never used Inktense on this, but this is awesome. Wow. That is very, very, very bright. And it actually blends that purple really nice. So you don't need much water at all. I put a little bit too much at the beginning, but you do not need much at all. But look how bold that is. Wow, that's really nice. So I do like it for that. And to the watercolor. Interesting. it's almost pushing the watercolor too much, if that makes sense. See how the edges, it's like pushing it all the way to the edge, where the other ones would be a little bit more. See, I just pushed it all the way up. That's strange. See how this, you can clearly see that it kept it in place and absorbed, not absorbed, but it sat where it was supposed to. This almost is so smooth, and maybe it just pushed it along, but this one didn't. So that's kind of an interesting fact. So I probably wouldn't use watercolor pencil on this, but Inktense I'd definitely give a shot. So that's interesting. All right, so the next one is the Uart 800 black paper. Don't know if you guys have this paper. I'm just gonna tape this down super quick because the edges are kind of curly. So I'm not even sure how some pencils might work on this, but we're gonna try. I like the 800 because it's a very fine grain sanded surface. So this blue you can't really see. So this paper would be great for any bright drawings you're gonna do. But the watercolor pencil shows up really nice. Never tried watercolor pencil on this paper either. I would think off the bat it wouldn't work, but you never know until you try. It looks cool already. Oh, that almost makes it even brighter. That's funny. Like more vivid, I guess. No, we can't really see. We might have to try a couple different colors. So it definitely blended. Yeah, the watercolor, I mean, it works, but I honestly don't like how this is blending, and it's just not doing what we need. So what I'm going to do is take a couple bright pencils here. Let's do some white and green so you guys can see this a bit better. This is the Inktense. This was the apple green and just the white. We'll see how that looks. So if you're doing a bright subject, it may work great. I think I had too much water. Hold on. That does look really cool. I mean, it is a bit weird feeling, but if you were doing an underpainting, because it's creating almost bubbles, which is kind of odd. We don't want that. So if you were doing an underpainting, I think it would work fine, but it just seems a bit odd. Because typically this paper, yeah, it's creating weird bubbles, and I don't think it's supposed to do that. But for the sake of showing you this black paper, so here's Polychromos. Works amazing on it. Then you've got your, let's see, it's Caran d'Ache, Luminance, works amazing. And then obviously your charcoal pencils, not charcoal, I'm sorry, pastel, which is what it's made for. So maybe we can do a pastel on the black paper, because I mean the pastel is mainly what most people use on this. But still, I wanted to try it out to see what it looked like, but you can see it's messy, it's kind of muddy, doesn't work well. Maybe if you were doing an underpainting with one color, I wouldn't blend on this paper with the Inktense. But these papers look pretty awesome. I mean, these other pencils will work great on it. So let me take that off. And our last one is the Lux Archival, my new paper that just came in. So this feels very, very rough. Okay, so when I took it out of the package, I'm like, uh-oh, I don't think I'm going to like it because it's going to be too coarse, it's not going to blend well. But I was wrong, because though it feels rough, it's almost like the Fisher 400, but thicker, and you can tell that the granules are so much tighter. It's hard to explain unless you have all of them and you've drawn on them quite a few times, but you'll be able to understand. Like, don't press hard at all, because the paper just snags that pencil so fast that you do not need to press literally at all. I'm just dragging. And it'll seem like it's eating a lot of the pencil, but you don't need as much of the pencil pigment to get the results you need. So you don't need to use so much of the pencil. That's why it feels like you're chewing off a lot. So it goes much further, I should say. And this might be my new favorite paper. I need to rinse again. It's just so nice to work with. So that works amazing with it. So I'd say between this, the Pastelmat, the Fisher 400, all the sanded papers seem to be my favorite as far as how bold everything looks. This brush is getting a little bit beat up. Let me try a different one. That's the other thing. The brushes will get a little bit beat up because you're pushing it on a sanded surface, so it's kind of messing with your bristles. So it takes a little bit of getting used to and playing with as far as how much water, the type of brush. Like this one's creating a little bit of bubbles, but that will go away. It's still blending it the way it's intended to blend. I mean, look how bold that is, and I don't see any of the texture. So it's similar to Pastelmat in that way. So basically, my camera had an issue, and I need to figure that out. But basically, with all those papers that we tried out, you can see the difference in how everything blends amongst and compared to the Pastelmat, the Bristol, Matboard, Uart, all of them, how it compares with the Inktense versus a watercolor, because it can be difficult to kind of figure out the difference of, you know, what one seems like and what one doesn't. How they react on the papers is a lot different than you would think. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little trial. We're definitely probably going to do the Lux Archival paper. I might do a demo of the Inktense of a like a lily pad flower, like on a lake. It's just a little 5x7. So I might do that for the next one on the Lux Archival because I'm interested in just trying a drawing on that one. So that might be the next demo, and then we can move on to something else after that. So that is going to be it for today. I will see you guys next time.